sites, the recovery sites. When they remove human remains, they have to keep them under guard. And they're too busy out searching for victims and searching for survivors that they, in effect, contract that out to private security. To me, this now, I was very impressed when I had this animation when the things came flying in from the left. I don't really know how they do that. I don't have to know how they do that. I just have to push the button. In any event, this to me starts the critical part of the presentation as to the role of private security. I think we're all very familiar with the slides I showed about the various disasters that are on the news all the time. Where does private security fit in? Well, if you want to identify a business opportunity for your corporations, for your companies, it's going to require a lot of research. Now, research in terms of identifying where are these disasters occurring most frequently. Florida for hurricanes, Gulf Coast for hurricanes, California earthquakes and wildfires. There are known areas where these things happen, and there are resources out there that have a myriad of statistical information which can identify every one of these areas. I've just put a few of them up there. But to me, the one that sort of leaps out, and this sort of takes me back to my insurance days, when I look at the insurance industry, there's an expression called CAT modeling, catastrophe modeling. They either internally to themselves or they hire private institutions which will model every potential natural disaster you can imagine and what the impact will be on affected businesses, primarily who they insure. So they want to know when a hurricane is coming into the Gulf of Mexico, what's its track, what's the likelihood it's going to hit, where is it going to hit, what insured properties do we have there. These resources are available. They are commercially available. So in the case of a security company that is pre-positioning itself to offer their services in the event of a disaster, you can outsource the research and not devote internal resources to pulling this information together and find out yourselves. What's the likelihood of a Cat 5 hurricane hitting New Orleans in the next 3 years? And if it does, where is it likely to hit and where is most of the damage likely to occur based on weakened levees, et cetera? And then if you have a lot of clients in that area, you are forearmed, forewarned, and prepared to offer your services. When you talk about how you would structure yourself from a business perspective, it's developing an internal group, an integrated team, a cohesive team that's taken this basic research information and it comes together to provide a strategy well in advance. And this is the kind of a plan that can be developed and put on a shelf. And it can be updated periodically, but it's there waiting to be implemented. And it may not necessarily, let's say you've done all your planning for an earthquake and what hits is a flood. Plan's a plan, as long as you've identified what you need. And these are just some of the internal core groups within, disaster-prone area, certain parts of Florida, the Gulf Coast. Your sales team should be able to identify where you have existing accounts. You can go to those accounts and you can, in effect, sell your services in advance. In my last position, I was a security director for a small financial management company. And I worked with a national company. And we had a contract in place with them. We're in a very earthquake-prone area where our main office was. They have what's called liquefaction. If the ground shook at resonated at a certain frequency, the building would have sunk into San Francisco Bay, maybe down to 1 story. So we had a contract in place with our contract security company where they would provide, we had around the clock, 1 person. We contracted to 4 people around the clock, pre-contracted. And we paid a little bit more into our fee, into our rate, so that we knew if it happened, they would provide the people. It didn't become my problem, it became their problem. Also a good way to get your foot in the door with new accounts, because if this is a service that you have, if this is a capability you have that you've developed, it's a good opportunity to knock on someone's door and say, listen, this area is prone to X, Y, and Z. This is a service we offer, and we can guarantee that we will be here when you need us in the worst disaster situation. This is where it gets complicated. What do you need? Basically, it boils down to 2 things, people and equipment. What's the availability of those two resources? When you talk about equipment, I can really get down to the nitty-gritty. You bring in additional security resources, you may have to house them, you may have to feed them, you may have to get them water, they may have sanitation requirements if you're going to put them someplace. You have to identify exactly what you need to put an increased or enhanced group of people in a certain area and maintain them there for an unknown period of time. Where are you going to find them? You have to have identified in advance manpower pools or resource pools to bring people in. I had a wonderful conversation with the state of California. I keep harking back to that wonderful state. I started a dialogue with their Department of Consumer Affairs, the bureau that regulates the contract security industry. And I said, okay, here's a scenario. There's a magnitude 7.5 earthquake in the Bay Area, massive devastation, law enforcement is totally overwhelmed, public services are not available. We need to bring contract security people in from wherever we can get them to help augment public sector security. There are a myriad of corporations who have assets here worth billions, and the recovery of the state basically is dependent upon the recovery of the businesses. How do we get these people in from California, elsewhere, Nevada, Arizona, wherever they may be that we can bring them in? Well, they can't come in. Why not? Well, they haven't satisfied our requirement of 40 hours of training and been certified by our bureau. And I said, you don't understand. This is a crisis. We're here to help you. No, you don't understand. We have a requirement that they have to satisfy 40 hours of studying and be certified by our bureau and go through our background check. Well, they've already done that in another state. We don't have reciprocity with any state. The only way we could do it is to get a mandate or a decree from the governor allowing it to happen. The message is, if you have an effective lobbying organization, you have that document ready to go, and you've already spoken to the governor's office saying, if this happens, you have to sign this because it's to the benefit of your state and your population. But to be bogged down in a bureaucratic situation like that, to me, is totally mind-blowing. In many cases, with the resources, with the equipment, you have to have pre-signed contracts. I mean, it gets silly, but I got to this level of silliness when I was doing planning, when I worked in New York City at Solomon Brothers. You're going to have 500 people. They're going to be sleeping wherever. They have to go to the bathroom. You need porta potties. Where do you get 300 porta potties? I don't know. You have to have contracts in place. You have to identify sources for these things: toilet paper, water, food. Where do you find it? Where do you store it? How do you protect it? How do you disperse it? All of this, it's very simple. Once you've identified what you need, laying it out in a plan. Next area where you have to address before you go into these areas is to be registered with or compliant with the requirements of whatever state you're operating in or going into with their internal regulatory requirements. This is not the consumer affairs people. This is the OEM or the OES, Office of Emergency Services. They have pre-registration forms. They may require you to have done or set yourself up in such a way, and then you're authorized in advance. So if it does happen, you can go up and say, okay, we're company X, Y, or Z, and they say, fine, you're cleared, you're in. Better to do it ahead of time than try and do it and stand in line with everybody else when the disaster happens. And then have a contingency plan which basically says, depending on the number of your clients, the amount of disruption and communication or transportation problems that exist, determines the level of response that you'll be able to provide. Level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 being the worst, we mobilize resources X, Y, and Z. So depending upon where you are, what the disaster is, what the level of disaster is, this is how you organize your response. Now, if you happen to be a smaller company, maybe things of this nature may be beyond, in terms of magnitude, capability of planning or providing a service. Think about the other side. The larger companies are going to need people. Perhaps you could be a subcontractor